The Arctic is no longer a distant frontier. It is a strategic crossroad. As ice retreats and competition intensifies, global powers are racing to define new rules of access, security and influence. This week in Davos, President Donald Trump claimed progress, announcing a framework agreement on Greenland after talks with NATO's leadership. But what does that framework really mean? Is this the beginning of a new US-led Arctic order, or simply diplomatic messaging designed to calm allies and markets? Can NATO deepen its role in the High North without crossing red lines on sovereignty? And where does Greenland itself stand as major powers debate its strategic value? Today, on In Depth, we examine what's real, what's rhetorical, and what this moment reveals about power, the alliances, and caution in a rapidly changing Arctic. I'm Henny Safe. Don't go away. Welcome back. Greenland has emerged as a strategic focal point in global economic and geopolitical competition, transforming from a remote Arctic territory into a potential flashpoint between major powers. According to Politico, US efforts to secure total access and influence over the island, framed as essential for national security and perceived Chinese and Russian advances in the Arctic, have strained transatlantic relations and triggered European pushback. Threatened tariffs on European allies opposing US ambitions underscored how economic leverage and security intertwined in this dispute, prompting markets to react to heightened uncertainty and alliance tensions. Greenland's abundant untapped mineral resources, critical shipping routes emerging from melting ice, and its role in a broader US-EU strategic rivalry are now central to a new contest for economic advantage. President Donald Trump has repeatedly warned that China poses a threat to Greenland, using that claim to justify increased US engagement and influence over the island's future. Washington Post stated that Trump argues that without US control, China or Russia could gain strategic leverage there. However, analysts in Beijing both reject the notion that China plans to conquer Greenland. China lacks military capacity or official intentions to seize territory so far from its borders, and instead pursues a broader Arctic strategy through scientific research, infrastructure, resource exploration and diplomatic engagement as the Arctic warms. Beijing calls the China threat framing baseless, insisting its Arctic activities align with international law and peaceful cooperation. To unpack the strategic, local, legal and alliance implications of Trump's announcement, we're joined by two voices with deep insight into transatlantic security. From London, Ambassador Patrick Theros, the former American diplomat, and Mr. Nicholas Williams, the former NATO official with direct experience in alliance coordination and Arctic security planning. Gentlemen, welcome to In Depth. Mr. Ambassador,
welcome, thank you.
What does the Trump administration mean by a framework of a future deal on Greenland? Is this a legally binding agreement or just a political understanding and expression?
I must admit that I have spent a good part of this morning scouring the press, calling a couple of friends to see exactly what has been agreed in this framework agreement, and I am not quite clear that I understand it. But one friend mused, I must say, that he thinks it's something along the lines of what we did with Guantanamo, which is a long-term lease of perhaps some base areas. But beyond that, I'm a little bit at a loss to understand where this comes out. I cannot imagine Denmark giving in at all on any question of sovereignty. And frankly, Mr. Trump could back down tomorrow from his claims and probably would not suffer much damage domestically, which is the most important thing to you.
Mr. Williams, how has this framework, whatever that means, affected NATO's cohesion, especially considering Trump's previous threats of tariffs and coercive rhetoric towards European allies?
Well, in one way, ironically, it's strengthened European cohesion against the United States. But overall cohesion with the United States have been damaged, some would say irreparably. There's an element of mistrust, a strong element of mistrust and dislike creeping into the transatlantic relationship. And I think that is, for the long term, making NATO almost an irrelevant organization politically. It will be an organization, if it still exists, to negotiate and talk transatlantically, the Europeans and the United States. It won't be an organization which actually looks outwardly to deter the Russians.
Mr. Ambassador, if we still are not quite sure about the specifics of the framework, but what sort of commitments or concessions could be within that framework? Security, military access, mineral rights, what could be remaining still unresolved?
That's a good question, and one to which I can only give a speculative answer. Giving a long-term lease, for example, as has been rumored, to a specific base area, or 2 or 3 or 4 specific base areas, is fairly simple and straightforward. I don't know what he could offer, what Trump could offer the Danes to allow large-scale extraction of minerals from Greenland. And most of the studies that I have seen indicate that it would probably not be possible to execute any major projects involving minerals until long after Mr. Trump has left office. So, this leaves me all, as I say, a little bit of a quandary. However, there may be some other face-saving concessions that allow Mr. Trump to step back from his demands for sovereignty. Trump himself probably sees no longer threatening Europe with tariffs as a sufficient concession to the Europeans. In other words, I'm not going to hurt you. That's good enough.
Well, Mr. Williams, what role do you think did the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte play in maybe pushing back President Trump on his economic and tariff threats, or strengthening the NATO alliance? And does this signal a shift in how NATO manages intra-alliance disputes?
I agree with the ambassador, your fellow guest. Much of the past 48 hours remains shrouded in mystery, and the NATO Secretary General doesn't have any power over NATO. He is just a convener. He is just the Secretary General who chairs meetings of NATO. Yes, he has influence, but he doesn't have any power. And he certainly doesn't have any power to negotiate even a framework agreement with the United States or a framework for an agreement. So it leads me to believe that possibly some Europeans asked him to float an idea, a framework for an agreement, but it's not a detailed one. So, yes, the Secretary General of NATO, uh, being someone who can speak to President Trump, may have been mandated or suggested to talk to Trump in a conciliatory way.
Mm.
But um, Mark Rutte doesn't have any power that Stoltenberg, Rasmussen, all the others had. He is just a chairman of an alliance whose members remain sovereign, and it's for the Danes to agree a framework or an agreement, not for the NATO Secretary General. So he has no power.
Mm-hmm. Your Excellency, after Trump's announcement and subsequent pullback from tariffs and the confrontational rhetoric, would you describe this as Trump chickening out, or is it a strategic recalibration of U.S. Arctic policy?
There are two explanations, one given by people who like Trump and one by people who don't like Trump. The people who like Trump, the MAGA people, will find that you see Trump use these threats, and he didn't really mean the threats, but he used them so he can gain some advantage in his negotiations with Greenland. Sorry, his negotiations with NATO and with the Danes, and that this was all a very clever move. He didn't really expect that they would give up sovereignty, but he got something that he wouldn't have gotten otherwise. People who don't like Mr. Trump will tell you that he reached out too far. That he's not terribly tethered to reality, and now he is trying to work his way back down. But again, he has this great advantage that his base will support him no matter what happens.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Williams, does NATO's increased involvement in the Arctic security under this framework risk deepening US-European divisions over the strategic priorities?
Well, the Arctic security has been on NATO's agenda for a while. Ironically, in Brussels, Wednesday and Thursday, there was a meeting of the military committee of NATO, which brings together the chiefs of the militaries of all 32 NATO countries. And they said, or they had an assessment of the security in the Arctic, and basically nothing has changed. There isn't an increased threat to the Arctic from China or from Russia, but of course, with the melting ice, as you put it, the Russians, who have a long shoreline in the Arctic, will be able to navigate more freely, and the Chinese will use it as a viable commercial passageway to Europe and elsewhere. And the threat is probably more commercial. Of course, now with Trump's histrionics, then NATO is now, and the EU, looking at the um, Arctic in order to placate, appease, and please Trump. Uh, Maybe that's a good thing, but NATO's resources are thinly stretched, and the priority is with Ukraine, not the Arctic, which is a far in the future potential threat.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Ambassador, you spoke about how Americans are viewing this tactic by President Donald Trump, depending on how much they are in favor of his policies. But what about the American policy makers themselves? Do they genuinely see this as cooperative NATO diplomacy, or as a unilateral US initiative cloaked in alliance language?
I think they see it as a president who is using, uh, it's hard to describe, who's using histrionics and other otherwise undescribable policies in order to buttress his domestic strength. He has, he is really talking to the Europeans like they need to be talked about. He has one great victory that he can that he's using back in America, which is the decision by Europe to rearm after, I must say, a rather thoughtless drop in armaments after the end of the Cold War. So he is touting this as a victory, and everything he gets, he comes back and he says, "This is a victory, and I can get away with these things because everybody is afraid of me, because everybody is afraid of America." So I see this, and I am a charter member of the blob of the internet people who follow international affairs in the United States. I think most of us see what he is doing as largely domestically oriented.
Mm-hmm.
American politics have always, American foreign policy has always been a offshoot or a consequence of domestic policy. And under Trump, I think it's being taken to an extreme.
Well, he's using the US-China tensions and also Russia as an excuse, but how much of this framework then is driven by concerns over China's Arctic ambitions?
I mean, I'm sure there are concerns, and there are legitimate concerns, but as our colleague said, China is not a military threat in the Arctic. The Chinese have, I think, a vision of restoring the 17th century greatness of China when they were the leading manufacturing power in the entire world, and they've sort of achieved that again. And I think we are having the wrong competition with China. Our competition with China is primarily economic, primarily market driven, and we are spending a great deal of effort, energy, and treasure in building up for a military confrontation with China, which I don't see the Chinese build up as well, but I don't see the Chinese really in an aggressive mode militarily. We have to worry about China's ability to snatch customers from us, to snatch markets, to get into Africa. We're denuding Africa of diplomats, and I think in 10 years' time, unless the Europeans do something in a more coordinated fashion than they've done until now, we are going to see the Chinese with a really strong economic foothold in Africa, which in turn will lead to a political foothold.
Mr. Williams, would an enhanced US military presence under this framework meaningfully alter the balance of power in the Arctic, maybe even in favor of the NATO alliance?
Again, the threat in the Arctic is a slow burn threat. It's the Russians, yes, will have increased access to the Arctic, but they have a huge Arctic presence anyway. the key thing for, as I understand it, Mr. Trump, is first of all to build his Iron Dome with a alert and intelligence center in Greenland. He could have done that under the present arrangements, but also to have access to minerals. And the Greenlanders, the 60,000 of them, have placed a ban on mining because they're a green-oriented largely indigenous people. And so it's difficult to see how the Greenlanders and the Danes will accept Trump's desire to exploit the mineral wealth, even if it is expensive to exploit. It's difficult to see how the Greenlanders will accept anything to despoil their country.
Do you think that would be a deal breaker and it would ruin that sort of framework Trump is talking about?
Well, it may be a deal breaker, but if this deal is all exaggerated and puffed up and so on, with diplomatic language and the right subject to Greenland people and the Danish Parliament to exploit the minerals, if it's all puffed up, exaggerated, diplomatic fluffery, then it won't be a deal maker. But if Trump wants a real precise mineral rights to exploit as American companies want, then I think that will be a deal breaker.
Ambassador Theros, is the Arctic becoming the new theatre of great power competition comparable to the Indo-Pacific?
Here's one place where I can answer definitively. Absolutely not. The Indo-Pacific, if you take America and China alone, the Indo-Pacific represents something like 2/3 of the economic and industrial power of the world. It is whether our competition is economic or military or in any other form, it's where it is the natural place for the boundary. It is there that we are running into the Chinese and the Chinese into us. The Arctic is, it's important, but it is not it won't decide the future of the world. Going wrong in the Indo-Pacific will.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Williams, what are the implications of linking Greenland negotiations with Trump's planned Golden Dome missile defense program?
Well, this Golden Dome is important to Trump, American industry as well. It's important to them. And I think the technologists, the manufacturers believe that as opposed to Star Wars, Reagan Star Wars, there is a practical possibility if you have if the Americans want to spend that money on it, there's a practical possibility that it can come to fruition, and Greenland is an important territory for an early alert system and possibly interceptors. And so, yes, Greenland is important. But as I said, Trump could have had this in any case under the present arrangements without claiming sovereignty or rights to or mineral rights. So it's confusing what Trump actually desires. And I think he is just making a drama in order to draw attention to himself and divert attention from Venezuela for other things. You notice every every week, almost every day, there's a new crisis with Trump at its center. This is his modus operandi, and we have to get used to it.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Ambassador, if this framework does fail to materialize, what would be the strategic cost for the United States then?
In real terms, there would be no costs. We already have, by agreement with Denmark, uh, the ability to use Greenland for virtually any practical military reason that we want. So, as I say, in the real world, in the world uh, where people go out and fly airplanes and set up radar stations, uh, we don't lose anything if this falls apart. The consequences are: will Mr. Trump see it as an embarrassment, a defeat, a humiliation? And if so, how will he try to get out from under it? Uh, he could divert our attention again, uh, which is probably what he will do, or he could probably find some other way, would like to find some other way to get the Europeans to make major concessions to him, which he can claim as victory. Remember, and this is my firm belief, we always have to see this through the optic of American domestic politics.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Williams, if this whole chapter of Greenland might be some sort of a diversion or a distraction for what's happening in Venezuela, for instance, if this framework does fail to materialize, would it have any strategic cost for the NATO alliance, or would it just be them calling his bluff?
I think the cost to the transatlantic alliance has already been paid in terms of damage to the political unity of the alliance. It's reinforced the European desire to have a Europeanization of NATO and to rely less heavily on the United States. Maybe that's what Mr. Trump wants, but the American military, depend heavily on the system of alliances, forward bases, and so on. And I think the damage in the long term to the US will be greater than the damage to NATO and Europe in the EU or the wider sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, Your Excellency, what does this episode, the Greenland episode, then say about the US's approach to alliances in general under Trump's foreign policy? Is it transactional politics or traditional diplomacy?
It is clear there has been a change. Mr. Trump is a president who has brought about a significant change in America's approach to foreign affairs. He didn't invent this, but he caught a mood, he caught a feeling in the United States that we are overextended, a belief that we are bearing too much of the burden. Well, American politicians for the last 40 or 50 years have blamed foreigners for all the things that have gone wrong in the United States, including deindustrialization. And so Mr. Trump is simply the culmination of a long series of politicians who are driving or perhaps benefiting from a certain malaise, a certain feeling in the United States that we need to separate ourselves from the world, to return to the more traditional American policies, the ones that were in place until Pearl Harbor, that the U.S. should look after itself and the rest of the world has to look after itself. Trade being the one place where everybody would like to keep it going, but they want to change the way we trade. So I think even if Mr. Trump leaves, even if a much more liberal Atlanticist comes to power as president, which I don't see, I think the relationship, the feeling of perhaps euphoric warmth that we had in 1945 has completely gone away, and more transaction, every decision that America makes will be affected as much by its transactional value as by its political value. It's hard to predict the future because it is the future, but we're not going back to the way we were. And it doesn't matter if Trump leaves office tomorrow.
Ambassador Patrick Theris and Mr. Nicholas Williams from London, thank you both for joining us and sharing your insights here on this evolving and complex issue. As the Arctic grows warmer, its politics grow colder and more complex. Whether this framework becomes substance or symbolism will shape alliances for years to come. That's all the time we have for this episode of In Depth. I'm Henny Seif. Thank you for joining us.